Welcome to the Maggiulli podcast, a podcast devoted to life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Nick Maggiulli. Nick is the Chief Operating Officer and Data Scientist at Ritholtz Wealth Management. He's also the author of the blog of Dollars and Data, a blog focused on the intersection of data and personal finance. And today we will speak about Nick's first book, Just Keep Buying, Proven Ways to Save Money and Build Your Wealth. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
So, Nick, you look quite young. I wonder, and you have been writing about personal finance. You work for a well-known wealth management agency. I wonder if you could fill us up a little bit about your background. From your book, you tell us that your parents never are college dropouts, so you went into finance and writing now a blog and a book. Yes, I'm just so eager to know about your past.
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California. By the way, I'm 32 now, so I'm not too young, but I'm still a little young, right? I grew up in Southern California, went to school at Stanford, was economics major there, really enjoyed the experience. After I graduated, I went into something called economics consulting, which is not as well known as like management consulting, but we kind of work in litigation and stuff. And that's where I kind of got some very good analytical skills, specifically in programming. And so that's kind of where I got my programming background. So I started learning data science, went into the data group there for a while. But, I love the job, love the company. The people were great, absolutely incredibly run company. But I knew that my heart was in like personal finance and investing. I kind of wanted to write about it. I really wanted to be in that space more in financial services. So I started writing about it in the beginning of 2017. It was kind of like a New Year's resolution. I said, hey, I'm going to write one post a week and just do that every week. And now I've done that for 290 weeks in a row. So it's been a lot, but it's been fun. So I've been doing that. Yeah, it's been like over 5 years now of doing that. And about 4 years into, or actually after about a year, I actually met up with my current firm. We started chatting and started interviewing and everything. And then basically a year and a half into writing the blog in, mid 2018, I joined them. So I actually changed careers into financial services, been writing ever since. And at the beginning of 2021, with COVID was happening, it was like peak COVID. And, up to that point in time, I said, hey, I'm going to be locked up forever in here. We're in lockdown. So I'm going to just use this time and write a book. So I had a lot of material to rely on from the blog, kind of put together philosophy and came out with Just Keep Buying. So it's a long story short of it. And now we're here and now the book's been released and it's been a fun process.
And what is it about personal finance that attracted you? I have been into personal finance almost all my life, but among my friends, every time I want to bring up a topic about personal finance, everyone rolls their eyes, and I feel lonely in this world. So I know that it's something that is inside of some of us personal finance bloggers that make us do this, read about personal finance, write about it, share about it, even though, at least for me, people in my surrounding they just don't want to hear anything about it.
Yeah, well, it's a very taboo topic for a lot of people. And I don't try to bring it up with friends and like, unless I bring it up first or something, right? It's not one of those things where, hey, like, you want to know my thoughts on it. I've already probably written on it somewhere, right? But it's a very taboo topic for a lot of people. And I think because of that, it's really weird to kind of discuss with friends. Some people are okay with it talking about it, but yeah, it brings up income, brings up a lot of stuff because money, everyone, there's basically no group of people on the planet that don't use money. Maybe there's still some like hunter-gatherer tribes out there, but basically every other civilization or in every other society uses money in some way or another. So it's like one of those universal things, like we have to eat. Well, we have money, and money is like it's like the universal language of the world, right? So everyone understands the concept of it. And so because of that, I think it's important. It touches areas of our life. Now, it's not the most important thing in life. There's obviously other things which are more important. Like you don't have health, it doesn't matter. All the money in the world is not going to necessarily buy you health, or you can't, all the money in the world is not going to buy you friendships or love or any of that stuff. You can pay for other things, but not for true love and desire and all that. So, but yeah, so I think it's definitely important and affects our lives. And so I think I've just always been into it for a host of different reasons. And I've just been good at like numbers and math and stuff. And so it helps that I kind of have that skill set already. But yeah, I just enjoyed writing about it. I like looking at it in a different way and just testing things. And is that actually right? Is that wrong? And so testing things with data, that's kind of like my way of looking at the world.
Even though you like to spend time with data and analyzing and thinking about it, the message of your book is quite simple, which is just keep buying. And I read the story of how you came up with that title, but can you share it with the listeners, please?
Yeah, so there's a famous YouTuber named Casey Neistat, and I'm guessing maybe some of your audience may have heard of him, but he got really big in New York. He was doing like this long form video content where he's posting like I think a video every day or something, and they were like long videos and they're really well edited. And it's like, how does he do this? And he also had a day job, so it's really wild that he has the time to do all this. And one of his YouTube friends said, hey, like what, he's like, how do you get to like, grow your YouTube channel? And he just told him, just keep uploading. Like that was what he told them. And so I was like, oh, when I heard that story at the same time, I was also like writing about, investing and everything. And I just said like, that's a great line. But instead of uploading, maybe I can change it to something else. Because I was talking about like I was looking at the U.S. stock market and like you just bought over time, you'd have built wealth no matter kind of what you did with timing. And so I said, just keep buying. And it's kind of a cool slogan. It's a different way of rebranding a very common, trope of dollar cost averaging. So we're just rebranding it. It's a little bit more psychologically aggressive, I would say. And I'd say it's a simpler message. When I say dollar cost averaging, that word kind of it's confusing. And just keep buying is the same thing. It's just a much simpler message. And I think people get it right away. Keep buying assets, keep investing, and over time you should build wealth.
Well, another subject that you bring in your book is the continuum of save, invest, continuum. And first of all, can you tell us what that is?
So yeah, so the save invest continuum, every person is on this continuum. And basically it's just all you need to know is two numbers in your life. And then I can kind of tell you roughly where you are on the continuum. The first number is like, how much money can you expect to save in the next year? Let's say you could save, I don't know, $500 a month. You do that for the next 12 months, that's $6,000, right? So that's your first number, 6,000. The second number is, okay, how much money do you have invested and like how much is that going to earn you? So really, how much can you earn off your investments? That's the second number. So let's say you had 20,000 invested, you're going to get let's say 10% return. That's $2,000 in expectation, right? I'm throwing that out there. So just on an average year, so you get 10%, right? That's $2,000. Remember the first number, how much you could save was 6,000. The second number, how much can your investments earn you was 2,000. Which one's bigger? In this case, 6,000, much bigger than 2,000. As a result, you should spend more time focusing on saving money and getting that money invested to raise the other number. Because if you had, let's say you saw the same 10% return, but instead of having 20,000 invested, you had 100,000 invested, right? Now, in that case, the 100,000 with a 10% return is going to earn you 10 grand, but you can only save 6 grand, right? So you can see now that number is bigger. It's basically just an equation to tell you where you should focus your time. And what you'll notice, most young people, that second number, how much their investments can earn them, is very low. It's probably close to zero, especially when you just started working. You don't have any assets, right? You have nothing. So all you have is your savings, right? Early on. But over time, as you start building wealth, you're going to see that investment number go up and up and up. And as you get older, and by the time you're like, 60s and stuff like that, that investment number should be much higher. And that should be able to return you a lot more and earn you a lot more than what you could do in a year from working. So that's kind of the goal, is like to build that over time. And so based on where you are on that continuum, which number is bigger is kind of where you should focus your time. So older people or people that are generally richer should focus on their investments, and people who are younger or relatively poor should focus on their income.
Right. Okay. So from your book, you make this comparison that you used to go out, I don't know, in San Francisco, and in a couple of nights spend what you will earn, what your investment will earn in a year. So you are bringing up the point that maybe we shouldn't be early on in our investment life, we shouldn't be so concerned about what kind of investments I'm doing, and just focus on just earning more or whatever. That's right.
Yes, that's exactly correct. So early when I was 23, if I had like $1,000 to my name, so let's do that 10% return again, that's $100. And like going to dinner, getting drinks at a bar after, taking the Uber home, that was $100 pretty easily, like in one night or close to it, right? So within one night, I would blow my entire investment return. So for me, it didn't matter what I was invested in. If I was 100% stocks and 60% stocks, 40% bonds, none of that mattered because I didn't have a lot of money, right? That's the facts. And so for a lot of people, especially young people, that's going to be true. And there's nothing wrong. I'm not saying you shouldn't care about your investments at all, but just set something and don't worry about it too much. Focus on what can I do in my career? How can I build skills? How can I be more valuable to people? That's going to earn you a return much, much greater than anything you're going to be able to do with your investments. So
right. I agree with you up to a point, because I'm saying this because I used to obsess about money as well. I'm an immigrant. I arrived here in Canada when I was 30, and I was obsessing about how much money can I save and where can I invest it. And I didn't know anything about investment. So I bought all kind of actively managed funds and this and that. And at that moment in my life, as you said, it wouldn't have made much of a difference one thing or the other, except that I find this obsession about what investments to make kind of prepares you for later on in life to already have like a roadmap. So whenever a person has accumulated some wealth or is earning a lot more, then they don't have to think from zero. They already have made a plan. They already know, oh, let's say, I don't know, my aunt died and I get, I don't know, $100,000. I don't have to put it in savings bonds. I already know, okay, I'm going to put it in this and this other thing and the other thing. So, and I find that is also of great value. So I think that obsessive at the beginning, even though it shows very little in your bank account, it has a great monetary value.
Well, yeah, that knowledge, it's basically knowledge is what you're talking about. I'm not against people getting knowledge, of course not, right? I just think you don't need to worry about it. I think that's the difference. So it's like the mental like stress, I think, is what I'm trying to prevent people. Right. And I'm not saying don't read books, don't get knowledge. Of course not. I would never say that. I mean, I wrote a book. I'm trying to get people to read books, right? So I'm not an anti-knowledge person. So yeah, if you're doing because you love it and you find it interesting, yes, read up on it, spend time on it. That's fine. But don't worry about it and beat yourself up about, oh, should I have 5% bonds or 10%? Like that, your asset allocation is not that important early on. It's good to know about assets, good to know about this stuff. And I think the book kind of exposes people to these different asset classes and what options are out there. So.
Okay, well, you bring a few subjects that are counterintuitive. For example, I'm going to start from the list of the second part of the book, which is the investment part, which is, I don't know, I guess that's the part that I'm super excited about. And I think some of my listeners as well. So you mentioned that we shouldn't fear volatility. Why is that?
Well, because volatility is just kind of a part of the game. And the experiment I do, or the thought experiment I do in that chapter is I said, okay, let's say someone came to you and they told you what the maximum drop would be throughout the year. Like, let's say we start January 1st. Let's say the stock price is at 100. And I say, okay, it's going to drop by, at the worst point during the year, it's going to be down 20%. So from that point, it's going to be down, to let's say, 80 at some point during the year, right? The intra-year drawdown is going to be 80, right? So it's going to go from 100 to 80. So it's going to drop by 20%. The question is, would you want to invest for the year? Because you don't know. I mean, it could drop 20% out the gate and then recover and have a big return. You don't know, right? And so the question is asked to people, like, what's the amount of, how much, if it told you there'd be a 5% drop, would you not do it? If I told you there's a 20%, 30, 50%, right? 50%, you're probably, yeah, maybe I should sit this one out for a year, right? And that generally makes sense. But the ideal amount of volatility you want is up to about 15%. Once you're over 15, then it kind of, gets a little bit scarier. So what I show is that you have to accept some volatility up to 15%. And if you know that it's going to drop 15% in a year, like, you should still want to invest, even knowing that, because on average, you would actually outperform than if you didn't do that, right? So the whole point is, like, there's some volatility in the market, and that's just a part of the game, right? Of course, if we knew that we could avoid 30% drops and 50% drops, we should always take that, but we're never going to know that, obviously, right? That's the future. It's like predicting the future. The whole point of that is to say, hey, volatility is a normal process. It's a part of the game. Do not panic when the stock market's down 10 or 15%. This is a very regular occurrence. In a given year, the stock market is going to drop by roughly 10 to 15% in just a typical year. That's nothing crazy has to be happening. Just a typical year, that's what happens in the stock market, right? So you should just expect stuff like that to happen.
Right. And would you say that our attitude towards volatility changes as we age? And the example that comes to my mind is that for the past 10 years, the stock market has almost been like a straight line up. So there are many people who have never seen a bear market, and they will think, oh, I love this game. But people who have been in the market a little bit longer, they have gone through different dips, and now their attitude is perhaps different than someone who have never seen a market drop, for example.
Yeah. So before March 2020, I would say that's a very fair argument, but I think March 2020, and yes, it was very quick. So let's preface this, like, that was the fastest drop and also the fastest recovery, I think, ever, because just the nature of it. But I think March 2020, if people panicked and sold, like, if there's a time to panic and sell, March 2020 is it. Like, literally the global economy was shutting down. I saw this happening. I was in New York City, by the way, which is where everything kind of really started shutting down, right? Was New York City was like on lockdown, NBA stopped, everything. That's when things got really serious. And so watching that unfold, like, if you didn't sell then and you were okay with that level of volatility, I think then you're probably going to be okay, even in, somewhat bigger drops, right? But I don't know. Of course, we don't know, right? That's the trouble.
Yeah, I March 2020. I have a friend who saw someone in a YouTube video making this horrible forecast of how the whole market was going to fall apart. And she saw perhaps at the lowest level in the stock market, the gain she had accumulated for more than 5 years. She saw some random guy with in a YouTube video with fancy graph, and she said, "Oh, I'm selling everything." And well, anyways, she have recuperated since then. But yeah, it's just sad that people react to all this noise and don't keep their emotions in check.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, there were legitimate reasons to react. I don't think it's irrational to see the global economy shutting down and say, hey, maybe I should get out. But at the same time, like, the stock market, what the stock market does and the economy does are always very different, right? Like, I think the bottom in these, let's go back to the Great Depression. The bottom occurred in June 1932, but a lot of economists have written that the worst economy in U.S. history was the winter of 32 to 33. So the market bottomed 6 months before the worst economic stuff was happening. I think we saw like the market bottom March 23rd, 2020, and then it started coming out of it, even while the news was still getting worse. So it's a very interesting thing to see play out. And so I think a lot of that is like, the stock market is not the economy, and it's scary, of course, but that's why if you're diversified and you have a long-term approach, that's, you shouldn't have to worry about that. And if you are worried about that, maybe you're taking too much risk in your portfolio, because these types of events will occur. You will see, I can't guarantee, but I would almost guarantee in my lifetime that I will see a 50% plus drop in the US stock market between now and, when I, pass away, whenever that is, so.
Well, I keep on bringing other examples of, let's say, friends in my life. I have this friend who is an economic professor, so I have an idea that he will know how markets work. Yet for the past 10 years, this person has been saying the market is overvalued. And I'm going to stay in the sidelines until the market is at an appropriate price. So I wonder if you could tell us about timing the market.
Yeah. So I think the best thing you can do for this type of exercise is just go to Google and search stock market overvalued, and then put in a year. Pick any year. Doesn't matter which year. Say you say stock market overvalued 2012, 2013. Doesn't matter. Stock market overvalued 2014. You will find so many articles written about why the market's overvalued. And yet, despite that, the market's gone up and up and up. Now, of course, are market valuations high relative to history? Yes. But bond yields are also low relative to history, right? So there are some, factors that say, hey, people are buying stocks and bidding them up because, they can't get yield in bonds, especially after inflation. It's like you really only have one shop in town, and that's with equity risk. And so for a lot of people, they're taking equity risk, which is probably going to lower future returns relative to history. But, at least it's something. You're going to get some return there, I believe, versus, owning maybe a bond where you're owning bonds and you're going to see your purchasing power, deteriorate, especially after inflation. So, I mean, obviously there's still reasons to own bonds for risk and other kind of, volatility reasons to own bonds. But, in terms of if you're just trying to grow your wealth, I would not say bonds are a great way to do that traditionally. And especially in this environment, it's not looking good, unfortunately.
Right. Although your book doesn't cover politics, I'm just gonna bring two examples. A friend of mine saw or said that he was going to stay out of the market when Obama got elected because, that's socialist, whatever. He's just going to destroy the economy. And the stock market did quite fine under Obama. But then I had another friend from another political party who says, oh, what is it? Trump is coming into power. The economy is a disaster. He's a comedian. How can he handle this? And the stock market did quite good. So I wonder if you have any comments about switching your portfolio according to which political power is in power.
Well, yeah. So I think that you already answered the question for you. If the stock market does well, regardless of who's in power, I think it and generally it does. I mean, there's no evidence. They've tried doing analyses on this so many different ways, and there's no statistically valid evidence that one party or another is doing something. Like, it's just, I hate these types of things. They're so silly to me because people come, oh, the stock market's going to crash when Trump takes over, and it didn't happen. Stock market's going to crash when this person. And it's, you know why? Because the stock market is millions of decision makers making decisions. It's even more than that. If you include everyone in the economy, it's really hundreds of millions of people, but at least the equity participants are millions to tens of millions of people making decisions around the world and affecting prices. And to think that one person is going to destroy all that is very unlikely, unless they do something like they're going to nuke a country and start a war. That can have effects. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the president can't do things to mess with markets, but as long as they're not doing one of those very drastic and outrageous behaviors, their effect on the market will be small at most, and so that's the thing to keep in mind, unless they do something really bad. Even if the tax cuts and when, we're going to do a tax bill and the tax bill and all this stuff happens, like that does affect markets, but it's not it's like a couple percentage points here and there, because everyone's trying to discount the future and say, okay, if that's true, then maybe profits are higher, and everyone's trying to do these little discounting games. And so they don't affect markets that much. They can in the short run, but in the long run, they really can't.
Okay, well, should we how can we buy during an economic crisis? Let's say 2020, or let's say now there's a war going on, and it seems like the United States is more and more involved one way or another. So, is this an opportunity, or is this something to stay away from?
No, I mean, I think during crises, it's fine. If you happen to have cash during a big dip or a big crisis, like I think it's probably one of the best times you can buy, because think about it, you're getting it at a discount, right, relative to history. Now the question is, well, how long? And let's use March 2020 as an example. At that point, I think March 23rd, 2020 was the bottom. At that point, the market was down 33%, right? So a little bit of mathematics here. If you drop by 33% to get back to even, to have a recovery, you need a 50% gain. Let's just do this real quick with the math. Let's say the price starts at 100 of an index, goes down to 66. That's a 33% drop. To get back to 100, it has to go up by 33, and 33 is half of 66, a 50% gain, right? So that's the math there. So 50% gain is what we were looking at to get back to even in March 23rd, 2020. The question is, how long was that gain going to take? So if you can make an educated guess about that, you can basically back out your expected return. So if you thought it was going to take 1 year, then you're looking at a 50% return. So would you want a 50% return? I would. So like, you would be silly not to. If you think the market's going to recover, within a year, like it'll be back, you have to buy. It's 50% return. Why would you not take it? Even if you say 2 years, take that 50%, divide by 2. That's not exactly correct because of compounding, but let's just keep the math simple, because I don't want to bring out a calculator and do all that. But 50 divided by 2, you're looking at roughly a 25% return. It's a little bit less than that. It's probably like 23 when you compound it, but let's just say 25%. Do you want a 25% return? Okay. So once you get my point, once you figure out how long you think it's going to take, even if you thought it was going to take 5 years to recover from like that bottom before we got back to the all-time high, you're still looking at a, what's that, 10% return roughly. I think it's like 8% after compounding. So that's still a decent return. That's like an average market return. So, and that's 5 years, to think that the market's going to take to recover. So obviously some markets don't recover after 5 years. I mean, you can look at, Greece hasn't recovered from its collapse in 2008. Japan, it's taken 30 years for its market to basically, I think it's close to recovered, or I don't know, depending on the currency you use, but sometimes it's not going to recover in 5 years. So that's a real possibility too. So you have to take that into account. But if you just do that math, you realize like, wow, this is actually a great bargain. Like even in 5 years, 10% a year, that's not bad at all. And what actually happened within 6 months, it was back at an all-time high, right? And so on an annualized basis, I think it was like over 100% annualized return. I mean, if you hit annualized, that's how quick you got 50% in 6 months. It's wild, right? It's unheard of in terms of recovery. So it's one of those things where, I think if you look at just the math very simply, it's very easy to buy during a crisis, because I'm not saying you should hold cash and wait for a crisis, because crises are very rare. So don't do that. That's usually suboptimal. And I discuss why in the book. But if you happen to be in a crisis and you happen to have cash, then yes, it's usually a good idea to buy.
And do you have any rule of thumb after the market go up X% to buy more?
No, I just try to just buy the same amount over time. And obviously if my paycheck goes up, I'll be buying more, but that's kind of, I just try to just buy over time. I don't try to worry about, exactly, I don't try to time, when the market's higher, I do more. No, when the market is lower, if we're in like a big dip like that, I will like say, hey, maybe I should cut back some of my spending and put more in, minor things like that, but it's just minor tweaks. I might add a little bit extra when we're down, but it's not like I would have to just cut spending a little bit just if I want to do something, or if I know of a bonus coming, I'm like, hey, I have a bonus coming on this day, I'll wait till I get the bonus and then I'll, invest all that then or something. Maybe I'll put it all into stocks instead of putting, I traditionally put some into bonds too. So maybe I'll go more stock heavy when things are down. I might rebalance, sell my bonds and add to stocks. There's different ways you can do this. But yeah, you have to just kind of get back on track over time.
Okay, tell me if my rule of thumb makes any sense. I try to buy whenever the market drops 20%. So whatever I can get together, even if I had to borrow, if the market drops 20%, I'm buying something, at least one extra dollar.
When it drops 20?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Generally, that thing will recover. It depends how long, right? Because if you had done that, I think you'd probably, I don't know if by the beginning of March it was down 20, but by mid-March it was down 20. And then it dropped another, 13 or 15% down. So you probably bought and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't really buy the bottom, right? So it's one of those things where it's tough to do. But yeah, if you buy 20, it's probably fine. I mean, if you wait longer, so for me, for sure, once you're down 30%, that's because like 20% happens a little more frequently. 30 for me is like a bigger threshold to be like, hey, I might change my behavior. Before that, I'm like, whatever, it happens. The market's down like 8% right now. So it's not basically zero to me. It's like it's 0 or 30, right? And 30 plus, right? That's how I kind of look at it in my head, right?
Well, now we have a lot of baby boomers retiring. When should a person start thinking about selling their stocks or just taking some money out of the market?
So there's a couple things to think about. One is risk, right? And so you're going to start thinking about risk as you get older and you're like, hey, I want to kind of preserve my wealth more. You want to slowly start, transitioning to a more, or less risky portfolio over time. So a more bond heavy portfolio. The other time to sell is like, if you're going to have life expenses, you're like, hey, I want to buy a vacation property, right? I think it's fine to sell. Remember, the book's called Just Keep Buying. So I'm generally a proponent of buying, but there are times when you have to sell. And the whole point of money and investing all this so you can live the life you want to live. It's not just to die as the richest person in the graveyard, right? So if we're trying to get people to live the life you want to live, you got to kind of, save this money and then do something with it, right? So that's what I would recommend is like, hey, just sell when the time's right. And, when you're like, hey, I need to buy something, sell. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the whole point. That's why you did this, right? Just remember why you did it. If you don't know why you're doing it, then that's actually probably more problematic than the buying or selling decision in the first place.
Many people look at their portfolio and they allocate percentages according to their age. So whenever someone is young, they have a big allocation of stock and a small allocation of bonds. And as they grow older, they invest that allocation. But I try to think mostly in nominal amounts instead of percentages. For example, if I'm 20 and my grandmother left me, I don't know, $5 million, I could have everything in bonds and that shouldn't matter at all. And if I'm, I don't know, 60 and I'm only have $100,000, I mean, it doesn't make a difference whether it's all bonds or stock. So I don't know. I think mostly on absolute amounts as opposed to percentage, but I think I'm alone in that way of thinking. What do you think of that?
No, I think it makes sense. You're right. Like at some point when you have enough assets, your asset allocation doesn't matter. Like you could literally, if you had $100 million and like you spend, let's say $100,000 a year, you could put everything in CDs. You could have it in cash. You could have it in cash under your mattress. It doesn't matter what you do. You're right. So you do need to think about absolute dollars. I think the whole, bonds, your age minus, whatever, it's like 110 minus your age. That's your percentage in, what is that percentage in stocks, right? Something like that, right? Yeah. There's very simple, different ways of doing this. And those are fine rules. I don't think there's anything wrong with those. At the same time, like you're right. Like sometimes you have to look at the dollars and say like, hey, like if you're, you could be 65 and have a $5 million portfolio and you only spend $100K a year, which I mean, that money's going to last your whole life, barring some crazy crash. And even then you'd probably have it a lot more in bonds anyways, and you'd be fine. I bet you could be probably close to 100% bonds and you'd be okay over a 30-year span if I'm correct.
Well, Nick, I think your book is very easy to read, and you take us to these two sections, the saving part and the investment part. And, according to where a person is in life, they will feel more attracted to one or the other. I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so the book's called Just Keep Buying. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and a lot of other online retailers. And you can follow me at ofdollarsandData.com or on Twitter. My handle is @dollarsandData, all lowercase. So thank you.
And sorry, one question just came out of my mind. Yes, out of random. I have a friend who is just keep buying, but these friends just keep buying Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
and, and,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, I'll let you make a comment on that.
Yeah, so I have nothing against crypto. I do think it should be probably a smaller piece of the portfolio just because it's so risky, right? And you can see, I know people that bought in at 60,000 and now they're down pretty badly. I mean, it's down whatever, 33% from 60 to 40, whatever it's at. So I've seen people like lose a lot of money there. And so you just got to be careful with it. So I do own some Bitcoin. I'm full disclosure, I have some, but I'm not one of these people that's like, you have to have all your assets in Bitcoin. And like, don't get me wrong, those people are either going to be supremely rich or they're not going to build much wealth. There's really only like, it's like Bitcoin's going to be going one of two ways, right? Over the long term, right? It's either going to rise a lot or maybe it won't, So that's kind of what's going to happen. I don't think it's going to zero either. I think that's silly as well. So my only recommendation for them is like, think a little bit about risk. And if you made a lot of money in it, great, take some off the table, kind of get a little bit more diversified, get some income producing assets. But yeah, you can still hold some Bitcoin. I have nothing against that. I would just say, keep it as a smaller percentage. That's all.
Well, some of these friends are saying they either want a Lamborghini or food stamps. Nothing.
That's very true. It's like it's the jokes where I'm going to work at McDonald's or have a Lambo. Yeah, exactly. So,
Nick, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.